Prometheus, Volume 2, Introduction. I turn 45 in a couple of weeks. It's an age where you start to develop a certain pessimistic acceptance. You consider that if there is a God, there's nothing to say he didn't put your life together with the same degree of care and interest that most of us show late on a Friday afternoon. You realise the last time that you gave your partner an orgasm was when they were looking out of the window and saw the neighbour reverse over your foot. And you realise that not only are you going to die, but that your planet and species will die with you. Of course, we're not the first civilization to have had this feeling, but we are the first civilization to be right. So this feels like a good time to be releasing an audiobook of collected journalism, just before life on Earth is extinguished by a reality TV host over a mediocre golf club burger at his nuclear winter White House, Mar-a-Lago, a kind of 3-star black lodge. Most of this book consists of columns I wrote for The Guardian over the last couple of years. This job generally involved me spending a lot of time explaining to an editor why they shouldn't be offended by something they hadn't understood. I personally found it a bit odd that I wrote for them at all. Where I grew up, if you saw someone with a copy of The Guardian, it meant they must have mugged their social worker. In many ways, this is a kind of golden age of sardonic commentary. Marina Hyde, David Mitchell, Barrett Brown. I've read some of my favourite funny writing over the last few years. So writing columns was fun, partly because I didn't need to be doing it. Writing columns reminded me of when I started out and I used to work in writers' rooms for other comedians' TV shows. There'd be a whole bunch of line writers in there, better at it than me, so the script was going to be great anyway, it was just a question of what I could add to it. In any case, I don't compare myself with such people. I see my true artistic rivals as being on the UK grime scene. Some authors say they picture an ideal reader when they write, and write to that one person. I see myself as writing predominantly for Wiley, Giggs, and of course, Lethal Bizzle. I'm fairly certain that some of their mixtapes are responses to columns I've written. We're now locked in a cycle of artistic and sexual one-upmanship that may well end in bloodshed. Of course, the only way we can tell if this book has truly been a success or not is to wait and see whether I'm silenced by the security services. What will happen is that one day I'll go out like Robin Cook or Dr. David Kelly. I'll go to meet a friend for a walk in the country, but when I get to the top of the hill, it won't be my friend waiting for me. It'll be a sergeant major, formerly of the Special Boat Squadron. We'll both know my time is up. I'll ask him for a final cigarette, and he'll bring out 2, one for me and one for him. I'll ask him if I can have a final wank as well, and he'll explain that my DNA would go everywhere and contaminate the scene. So he'll have brought a roll of lino for me to wank onto. I'll be wanking onto the lino, and I'll ask him to stop looking at me, and he'll tell me that he can't see me. All he can see is his mate upside down and burning in a Land Rover. That's all he can ever see, even when he closes his eyes. He'll ask me to hurry up because he has to go and silence Russell Brand in a minute, and then he'll try to help me out by talking me through Amy Winehouse's final wank. In the corner of my eye, I'll see him laying out Paul Ross's corpse to make it look like we died in a gay suicide pact. I'll look down on the Scottish glen below me and briefly imagine that the furious pumping of my fist is what powers the turning of the entire world. Then I'll feel a needle in the back of my neck, and suddenly I'll be in the bosom of a Buddha who despises me. I suppose you might wonder while you read this why I express myself in the way I do. I think it's that I see civility as being a little overrated. A good thing, certainly, but perhaps now a luxury that things are a little too desperate to allow. The current state of play seems to be that almost anything can be done to us, but we're expected to exercise discretion while describing it. I guess we need to decide, as we enter humanity's dark, final trench, whether we want to be able to describe what's coming towards us, or have the moral victory of dying with our civility intact. I can see worthwhile arguments on both sides. At this late stage in the history of art, I think all the truly great moments arrive outside the text. The first episode of The Handmaid's Tale is a gripping metaphor for the oppression of women, but only becomes truly great when the name of the male scriptwriter and producer flash up at the end. Perhaps this book's true purpose, dear listener, might be to give you and I something to discuss in the re-education camps. Or perhaps by then it will have been published, meaning that we have something to light the stove. Until then. Part 1. This section contains the articles I wrote for The Guardian in 2015, about UK politics as it lurched from the Scottish independence referendum to the party leadership campaigns. Reading it now, it seems like the major parties are sowing the seeds for the Brexit referendum and everything that followed. It's a story of corruption and greed, a disregard for human rights, and a tendency for the political and commentator classes to project their own simplified rhetorical positions onto an increasingly complex electorate. Scotland fell for the oldest trick in the book, believing you will get a host of new devolved powers that were promised on a kind of pirate scroll printed on the front of the Daily Record. In many ways, a Scottish electorate can be canny, and perhaps rejecting independence was simply part of a conscious decision to bring them to an idealised endpoint, exiting the European Union under a coalition of Tories and some kind of right-wing homophobic anti-dildo creationists. One thing that strikes me, reading these columns back, is how much attitudes trickle down from elites. Theresa May isn't desperately trying to accommodate the unfortunate views of a racist public. She's surfing a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment that she helped to build as Home Secretary. Of course, these articles seem somewhat reduced because you can't experience them as they were originally seen, with a comment section. After my experience in newspapers, I don't know that art can truly exist without comment, and now feel that every album should end with 2 hours of people arguing bitterly about Hitler. I also like to think that I start to find my voice, a hugely pretentious way of saying get the hang of it, as this section goes on, but see what you think.